A cold wind swept across the battered ruins of Czechoslovakia in the spring of 1945, carrying with it the acrid scent of gunpowder and the distant echo of artillery. The war in Europe was drawing to a close, but for the men on the ground, the end felt anything but certain. In the shattered city of Plzeň, American tanks rumbled through the streets, their steel hulls glinting in the pale morning light. General George S. Patton, the legendary commander of the U.S. Third Army, stood atop his jeep, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the horizon. The city had just been liberated from Nazi control, but Patton's gaze was fixed not on the defeated Germans, but on the east, toward the advancing columns of the Red Army. The world was about to change, and in the uneasy silence between the thunder of guns, a new conflict was already beginning to take shape. It's a moment that history almost forgot, a moment when the Allies, united in their struggle against Hitler, teetered on the brink of turning their guns on each other. The story of Patton and the Soviet generals, of secret pacts and near misses, is a tale of ambition, suspicion, and the razor-thin line between peace and war. As the smoke of World War II began to clear, a new and even more dangerous game was about to begin. Let's set the stage. By May 1945, the Nazi regime was collapsing on all fronts. American, British, and French forces were pushing in from the west, while the Soviets surged from the east, their armies carving a bloody path through Eastern Europe. The Yalta Conference had already drawn the lines of post-war Europe, but on the ground, those lines were anything but clear. In the chaos of liberation, soldiers and commanders found themselves face to face with their supposed allies, uncertain whether to shake hands or reach for their sidearms. General Patton, known as Old Blood and Guts, was a man of action, a warrior who believed in striking hard and fast. He had little patience for politics or diplomacy, and even less for the Soviets, whom he regarded with deep suspicion. "We defeated the wrong enemy," he would later confide to his staff, his voice tinged with frustration and regret. Patton saw the Red Army not as liberators, but as occupiers, an iron fist that would soon close around the throat of Europe. On the other side, Soviet generals like Ivan Konev and Georgy Zhukov were equally wary. They had fought their way from Stalingrad to Berlin, losing millions of men in the process. Now, as they stood on the banks of the Elbe and Vltava rivers, they were determined to secure the fruits of their victory. The Soviets had their own vision for the future of Europe, one that did not include American tanks rolling eastward. The tension was palpable. In the days following the liberation of Plzeň, American and Soviet patrols eyed each other warily across hastily erected checkpoints. There were handshakes and forced smiles for the cameras, but behind closed doors, the mood was far less cordial. Patton's officers reported strange movements in the Soviet lines, columns of tanks massing just out of sight, artillery pieces being repositioned under cover of darkness. Rumors swirled of secret orders and coded messages, of plans being drawn up for a new offensive, not against the Germans, but against each other. It was in this charged atmosphere that the so-called secret pact was born. The details remain shrouded in mystery, but the outlines are clear enough. Patton, frustrated by orders from above to halt his advance and cede territory to the Soviets, began to explore the possibility of pushing eastward, of driving the Red Army back and securing all of Czechoslovakia for the West. He was not alone. Some of his British counterparts, including the formidable Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, shared his concerns. "The Russians are a danger to the free world," Montgomery warned in a private letter. "We must be prepared for the next war, which may come sooner than we think." Patton's staff began to draw up contingency plans. Maps were spread across tables and candlelit rooms, red and blue arrows snaking across the landscape. The Third Army, battle-hardened and flush with victory, could strike fast, seizing key cities before the Soviets could react. There were even whispers of a broader alliance, of German POWs being rearmed to join the fight against their former conquerors. It sounds like the stuff of fiction, but the documents are real, the conversations recorded in the diaries and memoirs of those who were there. Meanwhile, in Moscow, Stalin watched the unfolding drama with cold calculation. The Soviet leader had no intention of relinquishing his hard-won gains, and he was prepared to use force to defend them. Orders went out to Soviet commanders: hold your ground, but do not provoke the Americans, yet. The Red Army was exhausted, its supply lines stretched thin, but its numbers were overwhelming. If war came, it would be brutal and total. The world held its breath. In Washington and London, political leaders scrambled to keep the alliance from unraveling. President Harry Truman, newly installed after Roosevelt's death, was determined to avoid a direct confrontation with the Soviets. "We must not be drawn into another war," he told his advisers. "Europe has had enough bloodshed." But on the ground, the situation was slipping out of control. One night, as the city of Plzeň lay shrouded in darkness, Patton summoned his senior officers to a secret meeting. The room was thick with cigarette smoke and tension. "Gentlemen," Patton began, his voice low and urgent, "the Russians are not our friends. They are here to conquer, not to liberate. If we do not act, all of Europe will fall under their shadow." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I am prepared to move east, with or without orders. But I need to know, are you with me?" The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Some nodded, their faces grim with resolve. Others hesitated, torn between loyalty to their commander and fear of the consequences. One colonel spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, if we go to war with the Russians, there will be no turning back. It will be the end of everything we fought for." Patton's eyes flashed. "Better to fight now, while we still have the strength, than to wait until it's too late." Across the lines, Soviet generals were holding their own councils of war. Konev, a veteran of countless battles, was under no illusions about the Americans. "They are testing us," he told his staff. "We must be ready to respond, but we must not give them an excuse." Orders were given to reinforce key positions, to prepare for the possibility of a sudden American attack. The Red Army's tanks were fueled and ready, their crews sleeping in their turrets, weapons within arm's reach. For days, the standoff continued. American and Soviet patrols clashed in the countryside, shots ringing out in the night. Civilians huddled in their homes, uncertain which flag would be flying over their city in the morning. The world teetered on the edge of a new and even more devastating war. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the crisis passed. Orders came down from Washington. Patton was to halt all offensive operations and prepare for redeployment. The message was clear: there would be no war with the Soviets, not now. Patton was furious. "We are surrendering Europe to the Communists," he raged, slamming his fist on the table. But the decision was final. The Third Army stood down, its tanks idling in the streets of Plzeň, their guns silent. In Moscow, Stalin breathed a sigh of relief. The Red Army consolidated its hold on Eastern Europe, installing puppet governments and crushing any hint of resistance. The Iron Curtain was descending, and the world was entering a new era, the Cold War. But the story does not end there. In the months that followed, Patton continued to warn of the Soviet threat, his words growing ever more strident. "If we have to fight them, now is the time," he insisted. "From now on, the Russians will be our enemies." His superiors, alarmed by his rhetoric, relieved him of his command. Patton would die in a mysterious car accident later that year, his dreams of a final showdown with the Soviets unfulfilled. This secret pact between Patton and his officers remains one of the great what-ifs of history. What if the Americans had pushed east, defying orders and confronting the Red Army head-on? Could they have driven the Soviets out of Czechoslovakia, perhaps even out of Eastern Europe? Or would the world have plunged into a Third World War, one even more catastrophic than the last? Let me know in the comments. What would you have done in Patton's place? Would you have risked everything to stop the spread of communism, or would you have held back, wary of the cost in blood and lives? The legacy of those tense days in 1945 still echoes in our world today. The lines drawn in the rubble of Europe would shape the next half-century, dividing nations and families, fueling conflicts from Korea to Vietnam to Afghanistan. The Cold War was born not in the conference rooms of Yalta or Potsdam, but in the muddy fields and ruined cities where American and Soviet soldiers stared each other down, fingers on the trigger. For Patton, the end of the war was not a victory, but a bitter compromise. He saw the future with a clarity that few others possessed, and he paid the price for his convictions. "I would rather have a German division in front of me than a Russian one behind me," he once said. It was a sentiment shared by many, but spoken aloud only by the bravest, or the most reckless. As you watch this, consider the choices faced by those men in the spring of 1945. The world was exhausted, desperate for peace, but the seeds of a new conflict were already being sown. The decisions made in those final days would shape the destiny of millions, for better or worse. History is full of moments like this, moments when the fate of nations hangs in the balance, when a single decision can change the course of the world. The story of Patton and the Soviet generals is a reminder that peace is never guaranteed, that the line between ally and enemy can shift in an instant. It is a story of courage and ambition, of fear and hope, of the eternal struggle between freedom and tyranny. So the next time you see a map of Europe, divided by that jagged line between East and West, remember the men who stood on either side, staring into the unknown. Remember the secret pacts and the near misses, the choices made in the heat of the moment. And ask yourself, what would you have done? Thank you for joining me on this journey into one of history's most dangerous crossroads. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and remember, the past is never as far away as it seems.